Hi everyone, my name is Jan. As you said, I'm an integration engineer working for Stripe in Singapore, but this is not a Stripe talk in case you were expecting that. I might say a few things about Stripe, but this is not an official talk. It's really just a 20-minute another call for action and food for thought, so don't expect something too deep. Should be easy enough for the last call, for the last talk of the day. So I want to get started with something from Stripe, though, which is that we are a very user-focused company. There's a guy called Will Lawson who always preaches to listen to users first. And for anyone who has used our APIs who might know this, that we are very much focused on that. And he came up in a blog post with this kind of like model how to prioritize engineering work. And I want to reuse that during the course of my talk. I'm not going to introduce too much about this model, but basically he talks about that you have short-term or long-term work, and then you have things you have to do and things you may do. And for instance, something short-term enforced is an incident. And so you want to reduce that and ideally move to long-term discretionary, something that you can do to improve your reliability in the future. Now, you might have heard that as well from Google, that their SRE team always says our monitoring doesn't decide our reliability, our users do. And that's very much what Stripe does too. We don't actually do SRE, we do DevOps in the very classic sense of like you build it, you run it, plus a supporting team to do this. So my hypothesis here is that actually reliability is pure perception, and actually our SLOs are never real SLOs, they just approximate the trust from our users here. Now, I haven't come up with that. Actually, Niall Murphy last year in the SREcon keynote said something very similar. And that stuck with me because he said that reliability is socially constructed. I like that a lot too. He, however, saw that as a problem, and I don't, because I think that's just nature. We don't have to define it. We don't have to find a perfect mathematical equation for this. I like this quote from Michel Hansen. That before you deploy code, you should deploy empathy. And that's a little bit the guiding principle of this talk. Speaking of quotes, you see a lot of references down there. I'm not going to reference them because I really just wanted to make this a 20-minute talk and not a 45-minute talk where I walk you through the references. But please feel free to read them at your own leisure. Before I go into the depth, often we have this field called socio-technical systems. Again, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but one thing that I do find interesting that also if you even look at these architecture models, like for instance, you might have seen a hexagonal architecture or domain-driven design and all of those, what I always find interesting, they have in the center like this domain, this business definition that we have, but the user is outside. Like here you see a little smiley, it's almost not visible on the far out. Let's not care about the actual user, let's only care about our definition. And even if you look at really nice models like this one that I really like, it's always like the customer feeds into research, like the product manager or the product owner or someone like that. But somehow we always avoid thinking about the actual user who is right now using our system. So that was kind of like the starting point for this talk for me. So now let's get back to Will Larson's model here about the long-term and short-term work and apply that a little bit to our field. So you see long-term, short-term here on the slide. Let's redefine this a little bit. What we call long-term, we sometimes might also call SWE. What we call short-term might be SRE. I say this so because none of us likes to be called ops, so here you go. Do it on the stage. But of course, we all try to avoid incidents, but in reality, we are in the end responsibility for that. Well, you know, you can also turn this around. You can say the Swedes, they live in theory land. We live in reality. We live in production land, so that's much better. That's the way that I like to see us. Or you could also see, well, the Swedes, they live in Taylorist world. They live in control world. They have this perfect idea of a world, whereas we are Bayesian. We go step by step. We figure it out. So that's a little bit the model that I'm applying here. And then you could have the other axis. I'm generalizing what Will says here into, well, we have scale needs and user needs, very generic. So then you would say, well, we have platforms team, product teams, infrastructure teams, and field teams. Now let's go further in this model. So classic DevOps would be platform teams and product teams work together. It's always funny because we talk about DevOps, but even in DevOps teams, people never mention there's also sysadmins. But they are somewhere outside, right? They're the ones who fix the actual hardware, so they're not in the DevOps team, they are in the data center team. So that would be a DevOps approach. Well, SRE, funnily enough, is often actually this one. Fun fact, all the Googlers in the room, I know we don't even say that often, but Googlers have SWE SREs and sysadmin SREs. And so, of course, they work very closely together, but that would be the more classic SRE model. And then recently, we've seen platform teams. I don't really want to go into that too much. Personally, I don't like it, that term, because often it's very much outsourcing and vendor-driven, and just kind of like, oh, we do everything for you, and I personally don't really believe in those no-code solutions. For the ones who've never heard of it, there's actually a new emerging practice called no-code ops. Who would have thought? So look that up. I think there's even a conference for that. So very confusing. But anyways, in all of those models, we always ignore the field work. So the support people, the data center people, the connection people, all of these people, that's always outside. Maybe they raise a support case to us, but that's basically the maximum that we work with them. And I want to ideally change that. So let's look a little bit how we could do this. Extend this timeline and say, okay, we have our product and our platform. Well, what can be even more long-term than this? Well, research and hardware, for instance. But there is a lot of space to the right here. So that's what I call the fields. You have your support, you have your deployment engineers, you have solution engineering, sales, solution architecture, you have your infrastructure, sysadmin teams, integration engineers, hello, that's me. You have DevRel, I'm pretty sure we have some DevRel or developer experience people in here. So you have all of those people that somehow are not really considered part of SRE, but in my opinion, they all should be. Like for me, all that SRE means at the end of the day is you are I call it the user empathy glue. Like it's the people who say, no, this is actually happening. I don't care about your theoretical model. This is what's happening right now. And that means it applies, all of the SRE principles apply to all of these groups. There's no reason why they shouldn't. Like, yeah, maybe they're not SWEs, but SRE principles aren't SWE principles. That's a different world. So why shouldn't they apply? So let's give I give you a few examples what it actually means, because it was a little bit too theoretical. So we have heard in a few talks, for instance, interesting people start talking about revenue margin or ROI. Also, the ones of you who work on cloud would know that cost has become recently a very big factor. And suddenly it's like, no, you're not going to deploy the service because it's going to cost a lot. And so this is, for instance, something that we very rarely talk about. Even in the original SRE book, we very rarely talk about directly seeing cost. Now, again, when I moved from Google to Stripe, that was something that was refreshing for me. That's one word of saying it. The other word would be like effing scary to see how much money customers are really using when something goes wrong, because that's a payment API and that's just really painful. But it's good because it really gives you a sudden feeling of like, oh wow, there's real users, there's real people, they're really concerned. I personally work a lot in fraud, so on the other side of that, so I feel very proud if I can prevent that. I'm like, wow, there is this person that we just saved from being defrauded. That's amazing. So that's just really cool, and that's a good feeling. Netflix has something very interesting. They do that with their stream starts per second. It's their North Star user metric, and it's the same thing. Everything rolls up to that. How are users actually using our system? I like that a lot. Few more examples. Now I'm going to have a lot, so I'm going to go through them quite quick. For instance, we rarely track non-incident support cases. Workarounds. Why don't we track them? It's actually kind of important that the support case didn't cause an incident. Yeah, we found a workaround, but like, shouldn't that be part of the system? Near misses is a good example. Retry spikes. Oh yeah, it worked after the customer retried 5 times. Yeah, but it shouldn't have happened. And of course, service degradation as well. Also, the effort of the account team is often not counted. They call their sales manager 5 times a day, but the system is working great. Well, from a company perspective, that's negative margin. That shouldn't happen. So it's these kind of like things that we rarely correlate to our bugs in our systems, but we actually should. One thing that I've tracked in the past that I introduced a long time ago back at Google was reference to documentation. Why is always this API page code from Google? Why does everyone have to look up the order of the parameters? Or was it string first or regex first? Everyone always has to look that up. And so why doesn't your API solve that in a better way? What I'm working on right now is, for instance, what I call API integration shapes. So finding basically personas. User X is using the API in this way, user Y is using the API in this way. So these would be ideal cases. And then we can measure the precision. So, okay, all of these users fall in bucket A, all of these users fall in bucket B. Why is there bucket C of users that use your API in a very weird way? Like, no one should ever do that. And so that's something that you can track, and again, you can implement actually in your APIs, and of course you can have meta metrics for that. One more thing I wanted to quickly call out here, what we call zero SLOs. I'm not sure if any one of you is doing them. Things that should never happen. We also rarely track that. We usually get lucky. That's the part about our postmortems, right? So for instance, new users using an old API version. That should never happen. Why do they do that? Some old documentation, maybe they bought an old book on eBay or a robbed copy, so you could check that. For instance, you could also check if they have version skew or if they use low margin products on your site if you're a very cost-driven company. Users flattening out. So you have someone who onboards and then flats out. That shouldn't happen. I mean, sure, maybe their business is going bad, but they shouldn't just not use it. So this is something that you should definitely track, for instance, or also incidents or cases during known events. So sure, you can just track incidents and say, oh, we had 5 incidents, that's okay, that's within SLA. But if that was on Black Friday, it's just really important. So that's something that we rarely qualify. We don't really say, oh, this was an incident that happened during a time where we promised to not have an incident. And these are things that you can track, just as a few examples. Example number 2, I shortened this because we saw a great talk yesterday from the folks at Jelly. So that would be, for instance, your regular incident. If you look at your regular incident, again, we often say, oh, everything can be automated. And that's my problem with this platform vendor pitch when they say everything can be automated. Well, it's true. There are some platform components in this diagram, but everything else are humans. So sure, okay, maybe you get a little bit of efficiency, but how much efficiency do you really get? At the end, it's the coordination effort that counts, and the coordination effort is not increased or decreased a lot by replacing a few of those components. Yes, it's true, for new alerts, observability is great, and you can really quickly dig down. And fair enough, that totally helps, and I don't say anything against it, but I don't like this kind of like statement of, oh, everything can be automated and your platform will always run. That's just, I don't think that's ever going to be possible. Okay, so let's go back to our picture. Again, this was my model of like all of the roles that we usually ignore. Another reason why I find them so important is not just because it's the right thing to do and they should be SRE practices. I also think that they feed into SRE teams a lot. One thing that makes me always very sad, this is my first SREcon, but I've been to other conferences. Most people I talk to say things like, oh, I started as a sysadmin, or oh, I started in support, or oh, I was fixing switches. And then everyone always says, and then I moved away from it. And then it's like, oh, this is not a requirement. Like, now I'm a real SRE. No, you always were a real SRE. In the first moment when you fixed the switch, you were already a real SRE. And I find that really sad that we don't celebrate that we don't say, hey, I come from a customer support background. I know customers. I've replied to tickets myself, and they were damn angry at me. And that's a good thing, because now I know how it works. And I think we should celebrate that more and have a generally like a more welcoming culture to include these practices into SRE. I have a lot to say about Google hiring policies, but if I can say one thing, please no more dynamic programming questions for level 2 SREs. I think we really should focus on other things, and that would make, I think, our life a lot easier and our systems a lot better. If I now go deeper into what does those roles actually mean, maybe I'm being too abstract. So let me go through a few of them. Support, we maybe know. We have customer care for that. We have QA people. Then we have the more customer-facing, like specific customer-facing roles, like a technical account manager or service account manager, or we have, for instance, technical solution engineers. Then we have our engagement managers, our program managers. Any program managers here? Yay, program managers. Thank you for helping in coordination. Deployment engineers. We have forward developed software engineers. That was also the first time I saw that before, but it's kind of like a cool name also. Military references, but hey, I like the Navy talk, so yeah, forward deployed, maybe not bad. We have partner engineers who work with our partners. Who knew? And my role is also there, i.e. integration engineer. In the whole part of integration, then we have the whole DevRel people. We have our whole data science people, data engineering people. Lots of these companies like Looker and Datadog and all of them, they have data scientists working for customers, but we don't consider them data scientists inside the company, even though they actually are. Then we have the solution teams, the solution architects, the customer engineers, the demo engineers is a thing, especially in the world. And we mentioned CSM before. Someone said CSMs are going to be the future. Absolutely, I think so too. So if we look through all of that and all of those field engineers, what I really want to say is like that I believe that the SRE practice can be the water that all of those field teams swim in. Like that should just be, our practices should just extend. There is no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. Now, how will we do this? I know I'm a little bit short of time, although I haven't seen a sign yet, but I guess you sit too comfortable. So coming back to my dynamic programming reference here, I guess all of you have played by now with ChatGPT. ChatGPT can code, so that's not the problem anymore we're going to have for SREs in the future. I think what we We totally will. Just this morning, I told just someone I'm involved in an incident right now. I'm not going to say I'm recording what it is, but and so someone suggested, oh, why can't we just use ChatGPT to give the answer to people in the actual incident? And I was like, the last thing you want as a customer is an automated answer during an incident. Like, that's literally the last thing you want, right? Give a one-liner, I'll figure it out in 5 minutes, but don't say, oh, here's the reference to our documentation. No. So what do I think we actually need is, sure, we still need code. I'm not saying we never need code, but what's more important is bringing more people in. So for instance, I really like rotations. I like Google's mission control program, for instance. That's great. I've seen a few people with the leather jacket. So I think that's a great way of doing it. I also really like residencies. When I was still at Google, I did a lot of like university outreach. So really bringing new people in, internships, like all of these kind of things. Yes, they might not qualify as an SRE now, but it's a totally legitimate career path to say, start in support or start in tech ops, anything like that, and then move to SRE, but we will guide you through the way. Let's do a check-in after a year and see if you're ready for SRE. But not this kind of like blocking, this gatekeeping I find really, it's not the SRE culture. If I remember like my time at Google, SREs were the stewards of the whole Google culture. Everything from the walkouts to meme gen to all of this. So that's what SRE stands for me, that they are the ones who say this is an important culture, this is a safe space, this is psychological safety, that's what SRE stands for. Not just writing some automation code. I don't think that's not our goal. So if I leave you with one thing for this talk is that I think SRE is a culture of safety, of user empathy, and of embracing change, and that's embedded in engineering practices and principles wherever they may be, not only in your product or engineering department. And I want to close with 2 quotes here from Twitter. Jesse Robbins wrote that the DevOps is dead content marketing strategy is an exploitative attack on over a decade of progress in inclusivity, culture of trust, and safety. So please don't do that. And the second one I really liked was from Matthew Skelton, who, by the way, is the person who wrote the book on team topologies that also talks about platform teams, that he sees this gulf between approaches that assume only a machine is needed and the other ones that assume a nurturing of an ecosystem is needed. And this quote ends with like he would like to bridge that. And we shouldn't let ourselves be driven to camps where you have the platform people and the ecosystem people and they don't talk to each other anymore. That would be the worst that can happen to SRE world. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.